Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Highways UK keynote conversation. This afternoon, we're going to be discussing roads as economic enablers and why the devolution agenda and emerging sub-regional transport bodies could have a game-changing impact on the way we fund, we plan, maintain and deliver our roads. I'm Simon Marks from Arcadis, and I'm here. I'm from the Midlands. My office is in Birmingham. Infrastructure has double importance to me personally. Obviously, as a partner of Arcadis, we're involved in the design and consultancy around the delivery of roads, highways and wider infrastructure projects. But I'm also a board director of Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership and responsible for the place agenda. And of course, roads and infrastructure are key enablers of growth and the targets that we have set ourselves at GBS LEP. I'm very fortunate this afternoon to be joined by two very, very high profile leaders from the public and private sector who are recognised for their contribution in this arena. On my immediate left is Martin Tett, Councillor Martin Tett. And on my far left, I'm delighted to say we have Sir John Peace. Now, I guess many of us in this forum know a little bit about Midlands Connect and have heard of Midlands Engine, hopefully know a little bit about Midlands Engine. But actually, I was hoping, Sir John, just for a couple of minutes, you'd just give us a little bit of background on those organisations and some of the objectives they're seeking to achieve.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm here today primarily representing the Midlands Engine and Midland Connect. The Midlands Engine being an initiative that brings together, both for the West Midlands and the East Midlands, councils, LEPs, local enterprise partnership, universities, businesses, all collaborating and working together with government to drive economic growth. That is what the Midlands Engine is about, but we recognise that to enable that growth, to succeed, we need investment in infrastructure. We need a coordinated infrastructure and transport and indeed digital strategy. And that's what Midlands Connect is all about. It's bringing together for the Midlands as a whole, not just north-south, but east-west connectivity, working as a key component of the Midlands Engine.
Thank you, Sir John. Martin, perhaps you'd just give us a couple of minutes background on the Strategic Alliance as well, please.
Yeah, sure. And again, from my point of view, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for turning up for this session. From our point of view, the Strategic Alliance brings together 9 upper-tier authorities. That's those with transport and strategic planning responsibilities that stretches all the way from Oxfordshire County Council in the west, through Buckinghamshire, through Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes, all the way to Cambridgeshire, and includes Peterborough as well. So we include virtually every authority that's in that major growth arc between Oxford and Cambridge, and including Milton Keynes. And it incorporates also the 3 major local enterprise partnerships. So it's very much a combination of both business, private sector and public sector working together. Our ambition is very much to become the single conversation and single planning, effectively strategic planning authority and potentially delivery authority for that very high growth arc. If you look at the sort of businesses that are in that area, I mean, obviously in Northamptonshire, you've got a lot of the big sheds, distribution businesses, Buckinghamshire, an awful lot of SMEs, small and medium enterprises. But between Oxford and Cambridge, this is one of the really big, high growth, high tech sectors of the economy. And if you harken back to what was announced yesterday with the National Infrastructure Commission, they described the Oxfordshire-Cambridgeshire arc as being the UK's Silicon Valley. And it's our intention as a strategic alliance to help build that Silicon Valley for the whole of the UK.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Sir John. So, I mean, clearly, in order to deliver the growth that we've been talking about, we need infrastructure. I think, that goes without saying. We completely recognise that. So, Martin, could you tell us how important for you roads are as strategic enablers for that growth?
Let me just widen that question out, if you don't mind. I think it's not just roads, I think it's infrastructure. And I think you have to look at infrastructure in the bigger context, because whenever you've got growth, you need infrastructure. And that can be That can be physical roads. It can also be rail. And I think one of the key things that all the potential sub-regional transport boards offer, subnational transport boards offer, is the ability to integrate the road networks, the rail networks, transport hubs, and so on. But it also can be digital. And I think if you look particularly at the new economy that's growing up, you've actually got to look at things like high-speed broadband as well. It's often said that for the majority of children who are now at school, the industries they're going to work in, the jobs they're going to have, haven't yet been created. They don't exist yet. Many of the companies they're working don't exist. So you actually have to think of that whole digital piece as well. So from our point of view, as the Strategic Alliance, we're looking at the digital infrastructure, we're looking at the rail infrastructure, we're looking at the road infrastructure collectively. And for a traditional business, roads are very important still because you've got to actually contact your customers, you've got to contact your supply network, you've got to get your workers to and from the places they need to be to actually act for you. And you've actually got to be able to distribute, if you have physical goods, those goods out to your customers as well. So if you don't have good connectivity, you just don't have good economic growth.
I think absolutely agree. A fully integrated system of being able to move goods, people, services around is critical. And Sir John, your thoughts around roads as part of a wider infrastructure package as a strategic enabler for growth?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with everything Martin just said. It's very important that we have an integrated strategy. Roads are vital at this time, but so is investment in other aspects of infrastructure. Let me make another point, if I may, just try to put some global context around what we're doing here. We're living in a world which is changing very rapidly around us. And it isn't what we're going to do for ourselves, it's what we're doing for our children and our children's children. We're almost the new Victorians. Investment in infrastructure today, the jobs, as Martin was referencing, we don't know what they're going to be in 10 or 20 or certainly not 30 or 40 years' time. But if we don't invest now in that infrastructure, and that includes digital, we will lose out on the global competitive stage. And if you look at the world today in which we're trying to do all of this, you could say, in a nutshell, you could ask an economist and he'd give you a very sophisticated answer. I'd say it's a bit of a mess. And when you look at what's happened in the last week in the United States, when you look at all the changes that are taking place in Asia, what's happening in China in terms of the economic reforms there, and then you layer on top of that the turmoil still in the Middle East, and of course Europe, and what's happening with Brexit. I think it's very important that we as a country invest in our infrastructure now, put in place all the policies, all the strategic plans to make us a beacon of free trade. And it isn't just about big companies or big cities. Again, Martin and I were talking about this. Core cities clearly are very important in all of this, and we have to invest and support core cities. But a couple of years ago, I worked on a report for the Local Government Association, the LGA, on the non-metropolitan areas too, who are just as important. This infrastructure investment arguably is as if not more important there. So many of our new startup businesses, our entrepreneurs are coming from these small towns, these rural areas. So it's a time for us as a country to be very strategic, not worry about what's happening in the Silicon Valley that Martin referred to, or in the Northern Powerhouse, or in the Midlands Engine. This is about Great Britain being open for business. This is about competing with the likes of Shanghai, with Mumbai, with the likes of New York. We have to be competitive. And frankly, without that investment in infrastructure, we're not going to succeed.
Just one point.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to really support that last point of Sir John's, because I was on the Transport for North stand a little while ago, just chatting. And you get people come up and say, well, why are you here? You know, they're a competitor, aren't they? You're in competition as the heartland with Transport for the North or Midlands Connect. See, I completely disagree with that. I mean, yes, there are elements of competition in terms of some of the funding, but I think we have far more in common by standing together, because fundamentally, this is about the way in which the UK competes globally. You know, our competition isn't between Midlands Connect and the heartland. It's between the UK and the major growth points around this world. You go out to Asia and the Pacific, they have phenomenal investment in infrastructure out there that's going on, whether it's physical infrastructure like roads and rail, or whether it's the digital economy where terabytes are being installed into properties in South Korea. It's a global picture, and we mustn't think parochially around parts of the UK fighting each other.
I think I'd completely concur with what we've just heard. I mean, for me, UK PLC is where we're at. Yes, we have our regional agendas and our regional strategies, but it all contributes to UK PLC. And we do need to be putting out a confident, certain, and delivering certainty for inward investment, to secure that inward investment. And interestingly, it does lead me, and you both referred to investment in infrastructure, all types of infrastructure. And it does lead me to a question. Arcadis, we recently published a report, some of you may have seen it, called The Spiralling Cost of Indecision. So absolutely aligned with what you've just said. And what we highlighted in that report is that we have calculated that the cost to the economy in delayed and cancelled infrastructure projects, if we carry on in the way that we have done in the past, not saying we have, because we've at last made some decisions around Hinkley's and HS2s and other things, but actually that could cost us, I think it works out about £48,000 a minute. I mean, it is some staggering sum when you sort of calculate that up. So thinking about sort of our headline here this afternoon, the subnational transport bodies that we've talked about, do you think the emergence of these bodies will help us to avoid those delays and avoid some of that indecision that we've seen in the past? Do you think they're going to enable us to be more certain and to create the right environment for the investment we need? To Sir John first, please, if I may.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted you're highlighting that problem of the cost of delays, the cost of disruption. And I saw a statistic from, I think it was the Freight Association, that in 2014-15, we lost 60 million hours because of these delays on freight delivery. So forget what an economist would do in terms of translating that into a very large monopoly type number. Just imagine how much that's disrupting our lives. Just imagine if you're a small business, a startup business, and you're dependent upon deliveries or communication to grow your business. Frankly, you'd move. You couldn't cope with that. And I speak as an entrepreneur, and we have to recognize that the jobs of the future, as Martin said very wisely, they're going to come from a different place than they've come from in the last maybe 50 years. So anything we can do to enable this to be quicker, easier, and remove those delays has got to be a good thing. So therefore, the subnational transport bodies, I think, are an important step to localize more the implementation and execution of those policies. I certainly don't think they should be done in isolation of an overall national policy, but with local knowledge, with local focus, and more importantly, by bringing all the stakeholders together, as we are doing in Midlands Connect, I think you have a much better chance of avoiding the classical problem, which is infrastructure catching up with what business and society needs. We need to get out in front, anticipate what's coming, and that's difficult today in this technological age. But if we don't do it, we'll always be playing catch up and not being competitive. Martin.
Again, it's hard to disagree with anything Sir John said. I've got to say, from my point of view, will they solve the problem? The answer is we don't know yet. A lot will depend on how they're delivered and to what extent the government actually takes them really seriously. I think the idea of having a national picture is right, but you do need that bottom-up devolution in terms of the ability of regions, and we're allowed to say regions again now that Sir Eric Pickles has moved on, because you do need, a more than purely parochial look at big issues like transportation. You've got to look upon a region as a whole and then look at the connectivity between the regions. So one of my hopes for the subnational transport boards is that they will look at the regional picture, they'll look at the importance of connectivity within a region and across boundaries between regions. They can prioritise locally where the investment's got to go. They can work with the bodies like Highways England, they can work with the rail organisations, transport bodies, the whole industry in terms of the supply chain, to actually look at how you can deliver the right priorities meshed into the overall national priorities. But the worst problem I always find, talking as a transport authority at the moment, is the constant chopping and changing of the amounts of money. You know, the drip feed of money almost on a year-by-year basis. It doesn't give the ability to plan long-term. You have no certainty whatsoever in terms of what you can deliver almost 2 years out. In fact, when you're planning now, you're not even sure what you can deliver next year because the autumn statement might chop your legs off. So, you know, there's really so little ability to give the long-term certainty that so many of the major contractors in the industry require. And that raises costs in the long term because you can't give long-term strategic infrastructure plans out to the industry. And also the way in which government breaks up the money into lots of little packets that you have to bid for separately. I mean, I know from working on our local enterprise partnership, you know, the constant reworking of bids to try and get pocket handkerchief size amounts of money out of central government on a drip feed basis. It's just a crazy way of going about it, and I hope the STPs actually help advance that.
I'd actually, Martin, share that frustration, as I spent 2 days locked in a room about a week ago going through LGF bids, trying to get those prioritised and ready for the next round of funding. So yes, it is a challenging environment. And I think, and again, I'm thinking a little bit locally here, but this is a national agenda, is all around devolution and combined authorities, which of course seems to be a flavour very much at the moment. And those of you from the West Midlands will be aware of our combined authority, and we have a mayoral election on, I think, the 4th of May next year, so that will be interesting to see how that race ends up. But clearly that's a direction of travel, and not another layer, shall we say, of your bureaucracy, because actually this is about relocating power, this is about relocating money to people who can make decisions and hopefully look at the long term a little bit more perhaps than we are able to at the moment. I just wanted to take your views, and Martin, I'll start with you if I may, on devolution and combined authorities, and actually whether you think that will be a benefit, a hindrance. Appreciating your situation, but I just welcome your honest view.
I smile because it's a topic I can wax lyrical on. Devolution's a bit like the word fairness. I mean, it all depends what you mean by it. You know, your context, where you come from, influences where you respond to the word. Devolution is quite often referred to by the government as meaning combined authorities, mayors. They often quote Manchester specifically, and there is a context there. In London, you know, obviously you've got a long-established situation with the Mayor of London, the GLA, and so on, that combines both devolution of specific transport powers combined with what looks like now housing and more planning powers coming down. Around the rest of the country, it's very different. There's almost no devolution deals in that context outside of the major metropolitan areas. They've struggled in East Anglia, they've struggled in Lincolnshire, they've struggled in the North East, they've struggled in the west of England, and the government's insistence on having a mayor in rural areas is really at the moment a bit of a showstopper, and it's causing massive problems. And I'm not also completely convinced that the amount of money that government talks about outside of the major cities adds up to more than a can of beans. Some of the big numbers I've seen actually are when you look at 30-year funding. You know, and I keep saying, well, how many of you are still going to be in post in 30 years' time to spend the 30 years' money? I'm not that convinced. What I think is different, and that's what we just talked about just now, and that's the subnational transport boards. I think they have the power and the ability to look at the transport and infrastructure in a much more holistic way, and I think they offer a better model than some of the non-metropolitan Devo deals that are talked about, and I think they offer immense strength. But again, I want to see the government really get behind them.
Thank you, Martin. John, what are your thoughts on this topical subject?
I'm not a politician. I'm a simple business leader, and often I just don't recognise the boundaries that exist today, let alone any new boundaries that come in place. What I do know is the current model of being too London-centric isn't working. And we're mixing up being too London-centric, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of London. I think it is one of the greatest cities in the world. So my comment is about how can we localize on a national basis, or more importantly, regionalize some of the key decisions that are being taken. And I think Scotland, for example, I can see the frustration sometimes of seeming so far away from Westminster, so far away from London. And I don't think, as an economy, if I look out over the next 10, 20 years, we can continue to rely on London as being the key driver of economic growth. in some ways the sole driver of economic growth. So I'm a huge fan of regionalism. I believe strongly in the Silicon Valley that Martin was talking about. I know a lot of the businesses that are in there. We were chatting earlier. It's fantastic, and we need to exploit that, develop that. To do that, people like Martin locally are better placed than someone just sat in London. And I think the further north you go, I think the more that is true. That doesn't mean to say I believe in a fragmented strategy for the country as a whole, but I do believe one size doesn't fit all, and so you've got to have some form of regional strategy which is a part of an overall national industrial strategy, which I think is the approach being taken now by the government. But I've talked in my capacity of chairman of the Midlands Engine to many, many businesses, business leaders in the last 12 months, large and small. And I think they're hugely supportive of this regional agenda where they feel they can have more of a say in strategically what's going to happen going forward to drive economic growth in the country. And I think we need all of our stakeholders working together, our universities, our colleges, our councils, as well as our local enterprise partnerships coming together to drive this much needed economic growth, which I think is possible through a regional strategy.
Yes, that'll have to be our final comment, Martin, but please, no, do.
Sorry about that. It was the word industrial strategy that Sir John mentioned. To me, it's really significant. The government has a passion, and you heard Theresa May at the Conservative Party conference talk about industrial strategy, and I know that Greg Clark's been out all over the country meeting businesses and so on. And I think one of the key things as we look ahead over the next 3 to 4 years will be a way in which industrial strategy links with the infrastructure strategy of the country. They must develop together and not separately. Otherwise, you can have them going in different directions. And I think that's going to be a key thing the government has to deliver, working with us locally to make sure we have a really holistic view of where we're going as a country, and the right infrastructure is in the right place to deliver the growth this country really needs.
Martin, if I could just add something to that, because I know how influential you are in this thinking here, and you're making an excellent point here. But whichever route you go, elected mayors or no elected mayors, the trouble with infrastructure investment, it isn't for a term of 5 years.
Oh, long term.
It's long term. And when you talk to China, people in China, they're planning 20, 30-year time horizons. And I think my fear with devolution, if it becomes so politically focused that nothing can move in other than periods of relatively short periods of 4 or 5 years, we've lost the plot. We need to look at infrastructure and the way in which the global economy is evolving very much on a much more medium to long-term basis.
And I would just say, I think industrial strategy actually is about infrastructure strategy. I think one leads the other.
Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid that is all we've got time for. We had a very short window, and we could have covered so much more.
We were just getting going.
Well, I know we got the nudge to say we got 1 minute left. I thought we might try and drag it out for another half an hour, but apparently not. I'd like to thank you both hugely for the contributions. I mean, I think we in a short period of time, we went from how important infrastructure is, integrated infrastructure, including digital. Actually, with them, we've had an earlier discussion about the importance of digital. Through to actually the ability to make decisions at a local level. I think that was a really, really important message that came out to me, because actually we know our areas, we know our regions, we recognise they're part of UK PLC, but we need to localise those decisions. But importantly, we need to look beyond political cycles. We need to be able to plan 15, 20, 30 years ahead and give that certainty to the rest of the world that we are open for business. So I think that for me came out loud and clear. So thank you everybody for listening. I'd like to apologise. I think Little Mix are trying to compete with us in terms of the sound bleed that has come in whilst we've been talking, but hopefully it came across loud and clear. So I'd like to thank Sir John. I'd like to thank Martin. If we could thank them in the usual way, that would be appreciated. Thank you.